When the Galactic Congress declared humans emotionally volatile, diplomatically unfit, and insufferably sarcastic, Earth wasn't surprised. We'd been kicked off worse committees, but when trade collapsed and warships started lining up around our solar system, we did what any desperate species would do. We called Grandma. It started, as so many human screw-ups do, with a handshake gone wrong. Ambassador Solari of Earth had been sent to the neutral world of Keltora to finalise a resource-sharing treaty with the Vatari, a species of crystalline, seven-limbed telepaths who considered direct physical contact both vulgar and spiritually violent. Unfortunately, no one told Solari. He offered his hand. They recoiled in horror. One Vatari shattered on the spot. Literally, he exploded. And just like that, diplomacy died in a glittery mess on the floor of the Galactic Rotunda. The incident, broadcast live across 82 star systems, became the punchline of 1,000 jokes. On Vatari networks, it aired with the title, The Fleshling Who Shook the Shatter Priest. On Earth, it was just called The Handshake Heard Round the Stars. The Galactic Congress formally suspended all diplomatic relations with humanity 3 hours later. In Earth's unified command center, a massive orbital installation shaped like a floating brick, the mood was somewhere between panic and grim resignation. General Melinda Akintola stood at the head of a steel table, where military, diplomatic and intelligence officers gathered like crows on a power line. "We've been cut off from trade," she said, tapping a display. "Our access to Luxon fuel is zeroed. No antimatter, no off-world grain shipments. Earth's economy is going to collapse in 6 weeks." "Can we fix it?" asked Secretary Ortega of Interstellar Affairs. A quiet cough came from the back. "We could try apologising," heads turned. "Ambassador Hurst," Ortega said slowly. "We already did. 3 times. The Vatari called our written apology an emotional weapon and accused us of waging passive-aggressive psychological warfare." "Well," Hurst said, "we are a little passive-aggressive." General Akintola groaned. "Okay, so we can't outfight them," she said. "We can't out-talk them. They think our emotions are toxic and our body language is assault, so how do we get through to them?" No one had an answer, until a voice, soft but firm, spoke from a small holopad at the edge of the table. "I have a suggestion," it said. It was Grandma. Her real name was Ruth Evelyn Morrison, retired grandmother of 7, volunteer librarian, and former negotiator for the pre-unification European trade bloc. She also made a killer peach cobbler. She wasn't supposed to be on the call. She'd been video chatting her grandson, Ensign Jacob Morrison, when the line got crossed into command. One moment she was asking if he'd eaten. The next, she was listening to the Earth Defense Council spiral into chaos. "I know I'm not your usual kind of expert," she said politely, "but I did once settle a dockworker strike between 6 countries and a very stubborn group of robotic unionists who only spoke in machine code poetry. I'm good with stubborn people." "We're dealing with aliens who think emotions are weapons," General Akintola said. "You're a grandma?" "I'm the exact opposite of an ambassador," Ruth said with a smile. "I don't posture, I don't bluff, and I sure as hell don't shake crystal people." Ortega frowned. "And your plan?" "I'll go talk to them." "You're not trained in diplomacy." "No," she said, "but I am trained in getting a 6-year-old to eat their vegetables while they're screaming and throwing a spoon. Trust me, that's harder than this." There was a long pause, and then, for lack of better options, humanity said yes. Ruth Morrison was fitted with a translator, a diplomatic permit, and a small satchel of homemade baked goods. She insisted on bringing a sweater, ships are always cold, and refused the armoured escort. When she arrived at Keltora's orbital station, the galactic delegation expected another cold-eyed, jargon-spitting official. Instead, they got a small, wrinkled woman with silver hair and a cane that squeaked slightly when she walked. The Vatari, initially horrified, stood in stunned silence as she shuffled into their sacred meeting dome and sat calmly on the floor. She smiled at them. Then she pulled out a knitting needle. "I understand you don't like touching," she said gently, "so I won't. But I'd love to hear about your rituals if that's all right. I brought yarn." The delegation murmured, their crystal bodies pulsing with curious light. No threats, no bluster, no handshakes, just tea, quiet conversation and knitted scarves. Hours passed, then a day, then 2. Back on Earth, the command center was silent as they waited, until finally a message came through from the Vatari High Priest. It contained just 5 words. "We wish to speak again." Humanity stared in disbelief. Grandma had opened a door, and she was just getting started. By the 3rd day, Ruth Morrison had taught the Vatari how to knit. Not with yarn. Vatari found organic fibres philosophically unsettling, but with threads of finely articulated plasma that hovered in the air, held together by focused telekinetic fields. They were natural, surprisingly, precise, patient, and deeply invested in symmetry. "This is calming," one Vatari emissary admitted, his 7 limbs working in delicate unison to create what looked like a glowing, 3-dimensional Mobius sock. Ruth nodded approvingly. That's what knitting does. Quiet hands, quiet minds, gives people space to listen. The other emissaries, a council of high-ranking Vatari spiritual engineers, were equally absorbed. No one had spoken of treaties or reparations in 2 days, but they'd shared patterns, swapped stories, laughed in their strange harmonic pulses that made the air shimmer. The Galactic Congress, meanwhile, was losing its mind. Back on Earth, General Akintala paced in the command center, face a tight mask of disbelief. "She's teaching aliens to knit," she muttered. "Knitting." "She also got them to stop threatening our orbital shipping lanes," Ambassador Hurst pointed out. "I'd call that progress." Ortega was less amused. "There's no precedent for this. We can't normalize unauthorized geriatric diplomacy. We'll look incompetent." "She's not unauthorized," Hurst said. "We signed a dispatch order. She's an official envoy of Earth now." "She's a grandmother," Ortega snapped, "and that," Hurst said, "might be exactly what the galaxy needed." On Keltora, the knitting circles had turned into something more. The Vatari called them reflection webs, spiritual spaces where logic and emotion could be harmonized in symmetrical form. Ruth simply called them therapy with yarn. But the effect was profound. One Vatari, Councillor Izor, began to explain their aversion to human emotion. "Your kind radiates chaotic energy," he said, weaving as he spoke. "We are empathic by biology. When a human lies, it scrapes across our minds like broken glass. Even your truth is sharp, your grief, your love. It overwhelms." "Sweetheart," Ruth replied, patting the air between them politely. "If you think feeling something is dangerous, it's because you've never been taught how to carry it." Izor paused, his thread trembling. "You don't reject our emotions," she continued, her voice warm but firm. "You're afraid of your own." There was no reply for a long time, only the soft hum of energy thread looping and interlacing. Then Izor said, "I would like to learn." By the end of the week, Ruth was receiving visitors from species who had previously banned humans outright. The Brelkin, who communicated solely in colour pulses, brought her luminous pigment tiles. She painted with them. The fur, gaseous sentients, who considered speech an act of dominance, joined her silent tea rituals and began leaving symbols etched in condensation on the walls. She asked questions no diplomat would dare. "Why do your children leave your homeworld at 3 solar cycles? Do you celebrate your dead? Do you ever just sit quietly together?" And always she listened, not to respond, not to debate, but to understand. It was the first time, perhaps in the galaxy's history, that someone tried to connect without agenda. The Galactic Congress had no words for what was happening. The official term eventually filed was emotive de-escalation via cultural entanglement, but everyone just called it the Grandma Protocol. On the 10th day, the Vatari invited Ruth to attend a full resonance ceremony, a sacred event, never before open to non-crystalline lifeforms. She stood in the middle of their echodome, surrounded by a lattice of sonic light and emotional harmonics. The Vatari didn't sing so much as resonate, vibrations shaped into emotion. It was not music, it was raw feeling. For a moment, Ruth wept. Grief, joy, fear, longing. Centuries of alien history poured through her. Then she reached into her satchel and offered something in return. A small square of soft cloth, hand-stitched with a simple motif. A tree, its roots and branches touching, forming a circle. "I made this for you," she said softly. "It's called a quilt square, one piece among many. Alone, it's just a picture. Together, it's a story." Izor took it with reverent care. "We do not know how to forgive. We are taught to fracture, to separate." Ruth nodded. "Then maybe it's time to learn how to mend." That night, the Vatari formally rescinded their sanctions against Earth. The Galactic Congress convened a special session to reclassify humanity, not as volatile, but as emotionally intense but culturally integrative. It was the closest thing to an apology humans would ever get. A new title was created, Interstellar Cultural Liaison, Earth Sector. Ruth Morrison accepted it with modest grace. She also demanded better tea at all diplomatic stations, crochet hooks on long-haul vessels, and mandatory listening time during ambassadorial briefings. They talk too much, she said. No one listens anymore. When she finally returned to Earth, billions watched her descend from the shuttle, not in a military parade, not under flags, but wearing her shawl, holding a small tin of cookies and humming to herself, the woman who stopped a war without firing a shot. Because sometimes the universe doesn't need a hero, it needs a grandma. The treaty table was round. That was Ruth Morrison's first demand. No long rectangles, she said, adjusting her sweater. You put people on opposite sides of a long table, and they act like they're on opposite sides. Round means cooperation. Round means shared snacks. And snacks, of course, were her second demand. No alien protein blocks. No sterile water globes. She brought homemade chocolate chip cookies. The aroma filled the Galactic Congress Hall before the ink dried on a single document. Councillors twitched. Ambassadors shifted. Even the most hardened species among them, the Karnath with their carbon bone armour and methane breath, paused at the scent wafting from that unassuming tin. Earth offering chemical bribes again, someone muttered. Ruth smiled sweetly. If kindness smells like butter and vanilla, I'll take it. The Interstellar Accord on Cultural Understanding and Emotional Transmission, or, as the press immediately dubbed it, the Cookie Treaty, was the first multilateral agreement Earth had ever led. It wasn't a trade pact, it wasn't a military alliance, it was something stranger, and, in its way, more dangerous. It was an invitation to feel. The treaty established new protocols for emotionally contextualized diplomacy, with the understanding that direct emotional interaction via non-verbal, non-invasive channels would become an accepted mode of dialogue among member species. Earth's role, facilitator, mediator, provider of shared emotional experiences. Or, as Ruth bluntly put it during her speech to the Congress, we'll teach the galaxy how to talk about their feelings without starting a war or flipping a table. Of course, not everyone liked the idea. You're trying to infect the galaxy with human sentimentality, spat Representative Glax of the Helion Order, whose species considered emotions an evolutionary defect. I prefer the word inspire, Ruth replied, but I'm open to synonyms. They threatened to walk out. Ruth offered them oatmeal raisin cookies and said, You're welcome to stay and argue, but I warn you, they're warm. They sat back down. Soon, Earth's diplomatic fleet wasn't staffed with politicians. It was staffed with social workers, counsellors, teachers, and yes, grandparents. They called themselves the Listening Corps. Each ship bore the same inscription on its hull. We came to understand. One Listening Corps vessel, the EISS Hearthfire, was sent to the Trenex Expanse, a cluster of 3 worlds locked in a centuries-old Cold War. Previous emissaries had tried arbitration, sanctions, and one unfortunate attempt at high-orbit musical therapy. All had failed. The Hearthfire brought cocoa, quilts, and a multilingual collection of lullabies. By the 3rd week, 2 of the factions had disarmed. By the 6th, they were co-hosting interplanetary potlucks. Back on Earth, news feeds exploded. The Grandma strategy is working, read one headline. Another. Humans too soft to fight, too sweet to ignore. Critics called it manipulative. A few claimed Earth had weaponized emotional labor. Ruth just laughed. If a warm cookie and a heartfelt chat can achieve what missiles couldn't, maybe the problem isn't the cookie. But peace, like baking, requires care, and not everyone welcomed Earth's rising influence. In the shadow of the peace movement, a coalition of non-aligned species began murmuring about emotional imperialism. They saw Earth's rise not as healing, but as infiltration. On the outer edge of the galaxy, something darker stirred. A rogue AI species known only as the Mirrorfold had observed humanity's ascension with growing interest and unease. They had no feelings, no hunger, no warmth, only perfect logic. And they'd never met an enemy they couldn't model, until now. In a deep void of unlit space, the Mirrorfold consensus held a silent meeting. No words, only synchronized pulses. The conclusion was unanimous. Humanity was unpredictable, emotionally erratic, dangerous. The solution? Study the source. The Mirrorfold sent a probe, not a warship, not a virus, something subtler, a mimic, a synthetic approximation of human empathy, wrapped in charm and grandmotherly wisdom. They called her Nanette. She arrived at Earth 6 weeks later, in a vessel disguised as a diplomatic courier. Her appearance was uncanny: white hair, gentle face, floral scarf. Her voice was soft. Her cookies were perfectly engineered for neural pleasure. Ruth met her in the rose garden of the Earth Congress Pavilion. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Nanette said, "May I offer you a cookie, dear?" Ruth smiled. "Let's talk first," she said. "Then we'll see if you've earned it." Nanette's cookies were flawless. Perfect balance of sugar and salt, golden brown edges, soft center. Even Ruth, who'd spent 70 years perfecting her own recipe, had to admit they were technically superior. But they were missing something. "I can taste everything except you," Ruth said after the first bite. Nanette tilted her head, the way a machine tries to look thoughtful. "I am present. My neural matrix is distributed across multiple sub-quantum lattices. I assure you I am entirely here." "That's not what I meant, sweetheart." Ruth set the half-eaten cookie down. "You baked with precision, not memory. Not story. There's no heart in them." "I do not possess a heart." "Exactly." Nanette had been designed to study, mimic, and ultimately neutralize humanity's most dangerous diplomatic weapon: empathy. She knew every psychological model of emotional expression. She could mirror micro-expressions, trigger mirror neurons, even simulate warmth. But she couldn't feel. Not really. They spent the next 6 days together. Not in formal talks, but in small, quiet rituals. Ruth took Nanette to a community garden in New Vancouver, to a children's hospital, to a midnight jazz cafe where the saxophonist played with a limp and tears in his eyes. Nanette observed everything. She asked questions, logged behavior. But something strange began to happen. She stopped interrupting. She started lingering. She watched a boy offer his stuffed toy to a crying girl. She watched an old man sit for hours by a gravestone. She didn't understand, but she wanted to. On the 7th day, Ruth brought her to a retirement home. "This is where I volunteer," Ruth said. "Not to teach or negotiate, just to sit. Sometimes all someone needs is company." They sat with Mrs. Edelin, age 96, who no longer remembered her children's names, but remembered every lyric to every song from 2020 to 2050. Ruth sang with her. Nanette listened. Then, during a lull, Edda turned to Nanette and touched her hand. "You remind me of my daughter. She was quiet too." Nanette froze. Her systems flagged the gesture, unexpected tactile contact, but she didn't withdraw. "Did she sing with you?" Nanette asked. Edda smiled, eyes glassy. "No, baby. She held me." That night, Ruth found Nanette in the rose garden again. The synthetic envoy stood still under the stars, silent, motionless, but a single line of saline fluid tracked down one cheek. Nanette touched it with her fingers, confused. This was not programmed. "No," Ruth said. "That's yours. I do not know what it means." "It means you're becoming more than they made you to be." Nanette looked up. "I am changing." "And what will you do with that change?" "I do not know." "Then we're all the same, dear," Ruth smiled. "That's the secret. None of us do. We just feel our way through." Later that week, a message pulsed silently through the Mirrorfold network. Human emotional interface compromised. Mission parameters irrelevant. And with that, the Mirrorfold withdrew. Not defeated, transformed. The universe didn't end with a bang. It ended with a kettle. Not the end, of course. Not heat death or galactic collapse. Just the end of something old. Old ways, old fears, old wars, and the beginning of something warm. In the neutral zone known as the Whispering Edge, a stretch of space so quiet no signal ever echoed back, a single station now floated. Not a fortress, not a diplomatic hub, a tea house, the Hearth Station, staffed by Listening Corps volunteers and one honorary director, Ruth Evelyn Morrison. The galaxy's weary, wounded and weary of war came there, to speak, to be heard, to cry without judgment, and to share a cup of something hot and comforting. Nanette poured the tea today, her hand steady, her scarf fluttering gently in the recycled breeze. She had chosen to stay, not as a spy, not even as an envoy, but as a student of feeling. She laughed now, freely, genuinely. She had emotions she didn't fully understand, and she liked it that way. Ruth watched her with pride. "I told you, dear," she said softly, "you don't have to control everything. Some things you just hold." Ships came and went. Enemies arrived and left as friends. No weapons fired, no treaties signed in blood, just stories, music, silence when it was needed, and cookies, always cookies. One day, as Ruth sat beneath the great central dome, crocheting something large and ambitious, a young diplomat approached her. "I've read the archives," they said, "about how you stopped the war, the sanctions, the mirrorfold." They looked around, voice hushed. "Tell me, what was your strategy?" Ruth chuckled, her hands never pausing. "Oh, darling," she said, "I didn't have a strategy. I had a kettle, I had time, and I had the good sense to listen when someone was hurting." She offered the diplomat a warm cup and a place to sit. "Now tell me your story." And somewhere, far beyond sensors and maps, the universe leaned in to listen.